if we can all set our intention. So the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Verily actions are by intention. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. And each person shall have that which they intended. And so it's very, very important that we are in the habit of being intentional. You can't get somewhere if you don't know the address. So the first thing I want to ask you to do is I want to ask you to actually think about why you're here. What did you come to seek? What do you hope to take home with you today? I want you to become clear on what that is. Maybe you weren't clear, but I want you to take a few moments and become clear on it. Maybe it's a difficulty that you're going through in your life. Maybe it's a crossroads where you don't know which way to go, a decision, a big decision that you need to make. Whatever that thing is, I want you to bring it to your heart. And then I want you to make a dua. I want you to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow you to get that which you are seeking, to get benefit in our short time today. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would put barakah in our time. Because unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enables anything, it will not happen. And so I cannot give any benefit except by the permission of Allah, and you cannot gain any benefit except by the permission of Allah. And so I ask you to first set your intention and then to make your dua. And I want you to include in your dua, not just for yourself, but I want you to also make dua that every other person who hears this can also get the same, that they can get what they need and they can get benefit. So if you can take a few moments and do those two things within yourself. I want to begin by talking about human behavior. So one of the first fundamental things we have to understand about human behavior is that underneath every single human behavior is a need. A need. Now I say this because we are in the habit of looking at behaviors, and then we are in the habit of judging behaviors, and then we are in the habit of wanting to change behaviors, right? We want to change the behaviors of our children. We see a behavior we don't like, we want to change it. We want to change the behaviors of our spouse. We see a behavior, we'd like to change it. We want to change behaviors in ourselves. We see a behavior, I don't like this. How do I change it? This is the question, isn't it? And the issue here is that a lot of us, our understanding of behavior is very, very superficial. It is very surface level. We look at a behavior typically and we think through the lens of a behaviorist. Now, behaviorists will look at a behavior and they'll say, okay, if you want this behavior to increase, give a reward. If you want this behavior to stop, give a punishment. Well, that can change behavior, but very superficially, because that is what is called first order change. It is at the surface change, it is not deep, and it is not permanent change. It is not real change. And so we have to start to see deeper than just rewards and punishments. Because if we want to see real change in ourselves, in our children, in our relationships, in our marriages, we have to start to understand what is underneath the behavior, what is under the surface of every behavior. And what is underneath every single behavior lies a need. A need. And that behavior is presumably fulfilling a need. So this is how I want us to start to change how we view behavior. When my child is misbehaving, are they giving me a hard time or are they having a hard time? And that's different. We have to start to look at our own behaviors, even if we take something like sinful behavior. Things like alcoholism, drugs, porn addiction, gambling, whatever it is, underneath the behavior, underneath the sin, is a need that that person is using that sin to fulfill. And so if you want to change a behavior such as sin, you want to stop that behavior, we have to start to look at what need is being fulfilled and then address that need. That is how you get deeper into changing behavior, okay? So what I want to talk about is this. I want us to go back to the beginning. Because if we want to change anything, we have to go to the root. And this is one of the things I want to get you to think about, is how can I look deeper? When there's a problem with the fruit on a tree, say the fruit is rotten, am I going to treat the fruit, or where do I treat? I have to treat the roots. I have to treat the soil. I can take that fruit that's rotten, but I can't fix it at the fruit. I have to fix it at the root. That rhymed. Similarly, when we look at our struggles, when we look at our community, and we start to understand what are the things that we are struggling with. Well, you know, I go through, and I have the opportunity to meet Muslim communities all over the world. And I like to ask that question. What are the struggles you're dealing with in your community? Whether that is in South Africa, Malaysia, the UK, different parts of Europe, you know, New Zealand. And the question always brings about similar answers. Well, we're struggling with domestic violence. We're struggling with problems in our marriages. The divorce rate is increasing. Our children are rebelling. Some of them are even leaving Islam. We're struggling with our mental health. We're struggling with our spiritual health. Now, when I look at all of these struggles, what you will find is they have a common denominator. Now we're not looking at the fruit, we're looking at the root. We're looking at the soil. And that common denominator is trauma. The common denominator is trauma. Now, we hear this word a lot. What does it mean? I will give you a very sort of umbrella definition of trauma. We often misunderstand trauma. So an event is a traumatizing event. So something that happened to you, that is the traumatizing event. Whether that was abuse or abandonment, whether that was physical, emotional, verbal, sexual abuse. But a trauma can also come, so trauma can come from something bad that happened to you, but trauma can also come from the things that didn't happen to you, from the things that you needed and you did not get. So trauma can be someone comes and punches you, that can cause trauma. But trauma can also be that someone starves you, that someone deprives you of your essential needs, such as food, oxygen. That's also a trauma, right? And so when we look at human needs, we find that human beings are full of needs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us a big ball of needs, okay? We have physical needs. As I mentioned, we have the need for oxygen, we have the need for food, we have the need for water, but we also have emotional needs. We have the need for safety, we have the need for belonging, we have the need for acceptance, we have the need for unconditional love. These are human needs. Now, when a child does not receive these needs, when these needs go unmet, that is also a form of trauma. So you can have, again, trauma can be something bad that happens, but trauma can also be the things that you needed that did not happen. It can come through neglect. It can come through abandonment. Now, The event, again, is the traumatizing event. But what actually causes the trauma itself is experiencing the traumatizing event alone. And you see this, for example, there was an interview that was done by one of the trauma experts of our time named Dr. Gabor Mate. Now, he was speaking to two different podcasters, and he asked them both the same question. They both had experienced different types of traumatic events in their childhood. One of them had been abused as a child, the other was bullied in school. And so he asked both of them the same question. He said, when you experienced that traumatizing event, whether that was the abuse or that was the bullying, who did you go to? Who did you turn to? And both of them gave the same answer. No one. I had no one to turn to. And he said, that is the trauma. It is not just what happens to us, but it is what happens to us that we end up dealing with alone that leads to the trauma. And I hear this story far too many times than I can even count, that there are people who, as children, they experienced abuse, and they went to a caregiver, they went to a parent, they went to a loved one, and they told them about what had happened. And at that point, they were either ignored, dismissed, shamed, even blamed. Many of them were told to stay quiet. You know, that's your uncle, that's your cousin, that's family, so stay quiet. That is the trauma. That is the secondary trauma, but that being alone in the traumatizing event actually is what caused the deep trauma. And so, why we have to talk about this? You might be like, but Yasmin, why should we talk about something that happened decades ago? What does that have to do with today? I will say to you, based on tons of research, it has everything to do with today. And the reason is this. We as human beings, we have a nervous system which is meant to keep us safe. It has one job, and that is to keep you safe. We have a brain, and in our brain, there is what is called unconscious programming. Now, what is unconscious programming? Well, it's kind of like learning a language. So each of you grew up in a home where you learned a language, right? Yes? Now, what language did you learn growing up? Well, you learned the language that was spoken around you, am I right? So you're not going to learn Chinese in a house where they speak Urdu. You're not going to learn English in a house where they speak Spanish, right? You will learn the language that is spoken around you. And when did you learn language? Well, you learned it in the first few years of your life, didn't you? Similarly, you also learned a sort of emotional language. You learned how the world works. You learned how to respond in times of stress. You learned whether or not it's safe to express yourself. You learned here's what you do when someone is upset with you. Here's what you do when someone has hurt you. Here's what you do. You also learned a type of language that is emotional. It created a blueprint. And see, that blueprint is what we are still working off of as adults. And that blueprint, that programming happened in the first 4, 5, 6 years of our life on this earth. In fact, they say that the brain waves, so one thing you'll learn about neuroscience is that we have different brain waves. So you have different brain waves when you're awake and you're conscious. You have different brain waves when you're asleep. At different stages of sleep, you have different brain waves. And then you have different brain waves when you're in a very suggestive state, for example, in hypnosis. Theta brain waves or a type of brainwave that you would put a person into if you were going to hypnotize them for brainwashing, basically. Now, what's interesting is that when we are falling asleep, and just as we are waking up, our brain goes into theta brainwaves. This is why, actually, if you want to reprogram your brain, this is the time to do it, because this is when you're most open to suggestion. If you want to program safety into your nervous system, this is a good time to do that because of the type of brainwaves. But what's very interesting is this, and I would say this is both amazing and also very scary. The first about 7 years of our life are basically theta brainwaves. When I heard that, it actually brought me to tears. Because what does that mean? It means that the parent has this incredible power to program what will become this child's programming for the rest of their life until they do the work, the hard work, to reprogram. But most people don't even recognize that. They don't even recognize that they're working off of unconscious programming. The vast majority of our behavior is not rational. There's going to be people pushing back on that. What are you talking about, Yasmin? I am so rational, right? I'm all rational. I'm just a big ball of rationality. I appreciate that you think that, but the truth is, if you study neuroscience, we are actually working off the vast majority of our behavior is actually not rational via the prefrontal cortex, but most of it is actually working off of unconscious programming. And if you want to talk about the neuroscience of this, I mentioned to you that the nervous system has one job, and that is to keep you safe. So in childhood, what happened is, whatever your environment was, your nervous system learned to keep you safe in that environment, whatever it was. And the human being, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this amazing brain and this amazing ability to survive, what happens is no matter what environment you put a child in, they will learn mechanisms to survive. Now, I don't say that this means that it's healthy. I mean they will learn mechanisms to survive. You put them in a jungle, you got the Jungle Book, you know? You put them in a home where there is a volatile parent, a parent who can easily be triggered. You put them in a minefield. You know a minefield? What's a minefield? A minefield is where you don't really know where the explosion will happen, and so you have to tread very carefully. If you put a child in that environment, they will develop survival skills to survive that environment. What's an example of that? Well, if you grow up in a chaotic or unpredictable type of environment with a volatile caregiver, you will learn, I better not upset anyone. You will learn, I better stay quiet. I better suppress my needs. I better say what's going to keep people happy. You learn that it is unsafe for people to be unhappy. And so what you learned is, in order to stay safe, I have to keep everyone around me happy. Do you know what that's called in adulthood? People-pleasing. This is where people-pleasing comes from. Have you ever met a person who can never admit when they're wrong? Okay, no judgment. No, you don't have to point. Maybe it's yourself. Maybe it's others. Do you know where that came from? That came from a childhood where it wasn't safe to make a mistake. In other words, making a mistake meant very severe consequence. It meant extreme rejection. It meant shame. It meant punishment. It meant the withholding of love. See, when we talk about unconditional love, I mentioned that this is one of the fundamental needs of a human being, of a child. See, most of us have not experienced unconditional love. Most of us have experienced what is called conditional love. What does that look like? Well, as long as you're perfect, as long as you don't make a mistake, as long as you don't upset me, as long as you do exactly as you're told, as long as you obey like a robot, then I will show you love. As long as you perform, as long as you achieve, as long as you keep bringing in the grades or bringing in the money, as long as, and there's a whole list. These are called conditions. And only so long as you follow these conditions, I will show you love. Look, I'm not talking about boundaries. I am talking about withholding love. I am talking about what happens when a child makes a mistake. What happens when a child doesn't perform? What happens when a child disagrees with you? What happens when a child doesn't do exactly as you command? For many of us, that is when love was taken away. Love was withheld. That's when a lot of people saw the silent treatment. Silent treatment is actually extremely harmful. And so what happens is, now let's go back to the person who can't admit when they make a mistake. The reason they can't admit when they make a mistake is because their nervous system literally learned, it wired to learn the following lesson. Making a mistake is not safe. Making a mistake will get you rejected, will get you shamed, people will stop loving you, people will withhold, affection. So I can never admit to making a mistake. And so that individual, as an adult, will find every way in God's green earth to avoid admitting that they made a mistake. And that will show up as maybe saying, no, actually, you're just too sensitive. Or you're just imagining it. Or it's all in your head. Or you're always making trouble. Or you're always, starting a fight. Or you're always so dramatic. The problem here is that this is touching something called shame. Now, I want to talk about shame because we cannot change our behavior, and we cannot heal, and we cannot break intergenerational trauma cycles until we address and heal shame. Now, what is shame? So shame goes like this. And I want to differentiate between accountability, healthy accountability, and healthy remorse when we make a mistake, versus toxic shame. Here is the difference. Healthy accountability says, I did something bad. Everyone with me? I did something bad, but I can fix it. Got it? I did something bad, but I can fix it. Shame says, I am bad. So how can I fix it? Here is the problem. Many of us, and I would dare say most of us, grew up with toxic shame. We grow up in homes, in households, in environments, in communities, where when someone makes a mistake, we immediately say it's because they are bad. Your child, maybe your child lies. What do we say to the child who lies? You're a liar. We didn't say, you lied and lying is bad and here's how you stop and here's how you fix it and let's choose better next time. No, we assign an identity around the mistake. That is shame. You are telling the child that it's not the behavior that's bad, it's them. It's them that's bad because they're a liar. When a child acts out, what do we say? We say, you're a bad boy. You're a bad girl. You are naughty. I hate that word. Because what are we doing? We are assigning an identity. We are telling that child that any mistake you make, it's because there's something wrong with you intrinsically. That is toxic shame. And toxic shame is actually the root cause of all of these dysfunctions. You would be amazed when you study something like narcissism. You would be amazed that the root of narcissism is an incredible amount of toxic shame. People think that narcissists are just so confident. They just have big egos, you know, they're so full of themselves. No, they are not. In fact, they are deeply insecure because they have a deep, immense amount of toxic shame. They actually deep down think that they are not good enough. And that is why they need to feel superior. That is why they need to put others down to feel bigger. And so what you are dealing with is not necessarily a big ego. What you're dealing with is a very, very fragile ego. An ego that is full of shame because deep down they think they're not good enough. And where does that come from? It comes from childhood. And so when we talk about why are we even talking about something from decades ago? It's because it is still running the show today. That is the same programming that we are using. Now, I mentioned to you that many of us think we're rational, right? I'm rational, my behavior is rational. Well, let me tell you something about the brain. The brain has different regions that have different functions. The part of the brain that controls our behavior, that where you have rather self-control, self-regulation, the part of our brain that allows us to act and think rationally is called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where we learn. The prefrontal cortex is where we can make good decisions, where we can act rational, strategic, problem solving. All of that is in the prefrontal cortex. Now we have another part of our brain, which is the survival brain. This is where fight or flight happens. This is where the threat response takes over. And that part of the brain is included in that part is something called the amygdala. The amygdala you can think of as your threat center. When a person is threatened, now when I say threatened, I mean obviously you see a lion, you're gonna get into your fight or flight response. Your stress response is going to be triggered. But human beings learn early on in life that threat can come in a lot of forms. And so when a person is triggered, what does it mean to be triggered? I know you hear this a lot. Trigger warning, I'm triggered. What does it actually mean? Here's what triggered means. Triggered means that something happened in childhood, okay? Whatever that was, and it left certain types of wounds on the body. Let's think of it as physical wounds. So this wounding happened as a result of certain things that happened or certain things that didn't happen in childhood. Think of it as growing up in a house that's on fire. If you grow up in a house that's on fire, you're going to get burns, right? So you're going to have these wounds on your body. Now, you may take those wounds and cover them up with bandages. right? No one can see them. Other people don't see them. Maybe you don't see them, but they're still there. Now, what happens when someone just barely brushes against one of those wounds? Well, it could have been just a light tap, but you will react in an extreme fashion because there's a wound under there. That is called a trigger. That's a trigger. It means someone touched an old wound. And now that that person has touched the old wound, you are now acting out of the old situation, not out of what's happening now. See, the thing about the brain is it's always scanning to look for, it's like a prediction machine. So it's always scanning for, what does this look like? What does this look like? The brain doesn't care what it is, it cares what it looks like. So for example, someone doesn't text back. Someone doesn't text back. Someone who has an abandonment wound, for example, will not see that as someone didn't text back. Immediately that person will see, what does this look like? This looks like the abandonment that I experienced as a child. And this is all unconscious. This isn't a conscious thinking. This isn't like your brain. This is not your prefrontal cortex. What happens when you are triggered, when something touches an old wound, when something looks like something unresolved from the past, what happens is we get into the survival brain. So now the amygdala takes over. When the amygdala takes over, guess what happens? The prefrontal cortex goes offline. Do you remember what we said about the prefrontal cortex? That's where we have rational thinking. That's where we have good decision making, moral reasoning, self-control, self-regulation, all here. But when you're triggered, this goes offline. This is why they say, listen to this, if your reaction is hysterical, it is historical. Got it? If it's hysterical, it's historical. It is not about what's happening right now. It's about what did this trigger from my early wounding, my early programming. I'll give you guys an example. I gave you the text example, right? Let me give you another example. Wife goes to husband and says to husband, this thing that you did, it hurt my feelings. This thing that you said, it hurt me. I was very upset because of this thing that you did or said. Is that going to happen? Anyone? Will this happen in marriage? Yes, this will happen in marriage. But see, if the husband has unresolved shame, if the husband has wounding that deep down, if the husband has a core wound that says, you're not good enough. Why? Because growing up, maybe that boy had very critical parents. Maybe that boy had parents who were very harsh, very overcritical. Maybe he had very inconsistent love, where it was withheld, and then he was punished, and then he was constantly criticized. And so what he has inside is this wound that says, I'm actually not good enough. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I can't measure up. So now when his wife comes and says, this behavior or this thing that you did, it hurt me, he does not hear, I said something that hurt her. He doesn't hear that. He hears, you are the worst husband to walk the earth. I'm telling you what he's hearing. He hears, you are a failure. He hears, you are failing as a husband. You are failing in this thing called marriage. What's happening is it's touching his shame. Remember what shame was. Shame was, if you make a mistake, it's because you're bad. If he grew up and he has all this shame in his body, he will not be able to take feedback. He will not be able to take feedback without getting triggered. Remember we said we're all rational? No, we're not. Because what's happened is you've now gotten triggered by just some feedback. The feedback said, you know, when you said this thing in this way, it hurt me. It's just feedback. His body doesn't hear it that way. His brain doesn't hear it that way. His brain immediately goes into threat mode. I am being attacked. I am a failure. This is more proof that I'm not good enough. And so now he's not even in his prefrontal cortex, is he? He is now in his threat center or amygdala, and now he lashes out. This is where he's now, instead of being able to take the feedback and hold it and say, okay, I hear you, here's what I can do, I accept, he's not able to do that because he's triggered. And so what he does instead is he says, actually, you're just too sensitive. Or, it's all in your head. Or, you're just insecure. Or, you must be on your period. These are examples. Yeah, very real. Or, he will get very angry. This is called defensiveness. This is called defensiveness. Where does defensiveness come from? Defensiveness comes from shame. You are hitting shame. You are hitting that wound that says he's not good enough, that he is failing, and that came from childhood. And defensiveness is quite toxic because it's actually one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, according to Dr. John Gottman, who studies relationships. He studies marriage, and he came up with 4 things that are absolutely toxic to marriages, and one of them is defensiveness. And that is what is happening here. So that person will lash out, or they will shut down. That's the other defense mechanism. You've touched my shame. I now feel like I'm not good enough. I'm not hearing feedback. I'm hearing, you're a failure. You're the worst husband to walk the earth. You are failing at marriage. In fact, you're failing at life. And so what happens is he might lash out or he may shut down. And these are defense mechanisms because that wound has been touched. And he is no longer in his prefrontal cortex. He is now in fight or flight. So one of the most useful questions that we can ask ourselves, if you want to understand basic human behavior, one of the most useful questions to ask is this: what did I have to do as a child to be loved, to be safe, to be accepted, to avoid punishment and shame? So everyone got that? What did I have to do as a child to be shown? In other words, what did I have to do as a child to earn love, acceptance, safety, belonging? Now, I say earn in quotation marks because none of these things should have had to be earned. These should have been unconditional. Now, I want to be clear. This doesn't mean we as parents are meant to accept any behavior from our child. That's not what it means. It means that while we correct behavior, we do not withhold love. Does that make sense? And this is something that a lot of us are not familiar with because we never had it modeled. Most of us dealt with very conditional types of love and acceptance. And so when we talk about what is the essential need of a child to be healthy, and those needs are that they don't have to earn love, that they don't have to earn acceptance, that they don't have to earn safety, that these things are given, these things are non-negotiables, okay? And so when we ask this question, what did I have to do in childhood to earn love, to earn acceptance, to earn affection, to earn attention, to earn safety, to stay safe? The answer to that question will explain all of human behavior as adults. So for example, for some people, the answer to that question is, as a child, I had to keep everyone happy in order to earn love, safety, acceptance, belonging. And so that individual, you will see as an adult, being a people pleaser. A person who now, decades later, continues to suppress their own needs, suppress their own thoughts, opinions, ideas, wants, in order to please and appease the people around them. For some people, the answer to this question was, I had to take care of others. I was the caretaker. And so now that person continues in adulthood to think that their worth, now this is about self-worth now, because whatever you had to do as a child to earn love, it became your self-worth. And so this person now grows up and believes that their worth is based on how well they can take care of others, not how well they can take care of themselves. No, in fact, they neglect themselves. This is called self-abandonment. They neglect themselves because they believe that their worth is actually related to how well they can take care of others. Now, this might seem like, well, this is a good thing, isn't it, Yasmin? I'm going to tell you something very interesting. There has been research, in specific out of Stanford, that has shown that there is a link between the suppression of healthy emotion and autoimmune disease. Autoimmune disease. And so it is not that we are just, altruistic. It's something harmless to suppress and to take on this role of my self-worth is based on whether or not others are pleased, whether or not I have taken care of others. Now, it is rewardable to be a carer for others, right? This is a beautiful thing. But I'm not talking about just taking care of others. I am talking about self-abandonment. And self-abandonment is linked to autoimmune disease. And so there is a physical cost. There is a health-related cost. For some people, the answer to this question, what did I have to do to earn love, acceptance, safety, belonging? The answer is, I had to achieve. It was my achievements. It was performance. How are you doing on your exams? Are you bringing in the money? What can you show? What can you achieve? What can you produce? And so these people will grow up and become what? Workaholics. This is where it came from. It has a very deep need that is underneath. I'm not just talking about people who work hard. I'm talking about something else. I am talking about a person who has linked their self-worth with how they do in their career. They have linked their self-worth with how much money they make, with how successful they are. And that was programmed early in childhood. Because early in childhood, they were taught, you will get more love when you succeed. Simple as that. You will be more accepted. You will gain belonging the more you achieve. The more grades you bring in and the more money you bring in. And so this is something literally wired into their nervous system. And that is why they are workaholics. That is why they will sacrifice even family. There's a deep reason for this. They will sacrifice even family relationships in order to climb the corporate ladder, in order to climb the career ladder, in order to be successful, in order to get the promotion, in order to make more money. It's a very deep psychological reason. And that is because in childhood, this is how love was given. And there is also the fear of rejection if you do not perform. There is the fear of rejection if you do not succeed, if you do not achieve. Understand? Just like there is the fear of rejection for those who, if you don't keep people happy, if you aren't a caretaker. For some people, the answer to this question is, I had to be the savior of the family. I had to be the problem solver. And so, what do? These are, how many of you would consider yourself a problem solver? All right. The interesting thing about problem solvers is that in any given situation, it's funny. In any given situation, when you scan any given situation, what are you always looking for? Problems. Thank you, sis. You're always looking for problems. Why? Well, so you can solve them. Isn't that your job? Now, what do you think that does to the nervous system of that person? Think about it. This dunya will never give you a shortage of problems. That's something it will always provide. You will never run out of possible problems. Why? Because we aren't in Jannah. And so if you're scanning, if your search terms are problems to look for, you will always find them. And you'll never run out. And guess what will also happen? You will also always feel anxious. You will not be able to relax. You will not be able to sleep at night. Because why? Because you are actually scanning all the time, looking for problems, thinking that if I can just find the problem ahead of time and I can solve it, I can stay safe. And my family can stay safe. This is a survival mechanism. You're looking for the problems so that you can solve them so that you can stay safe. But the problems never finish. And so what you're actually doing is you're surrounding yourself with nothing but problems. And this is the interesting thing about human psychology, is that whatever you focus on grows. Sis. Whatever you focus on grows. So now you can imagine, if you're always focused on problems, not only do they not run out, but they grow. I give this example. You walk into a garden and you've got these beautiful roses and daisies and trees and birds, and it's just gorgeous. But you look past all that because you're looking for problems. And you look past all of that and you see an ant. There's an ant on the ground. And you say, I see an ant. I don't like ants. Ants are a problem. So now what you do is, you don't see the flowers anymore. You don't see the birds anymore. You don't see the trees anymore. Now you are hyperfixated on the ant. And now all you do is talk about the ant. All you think about is the ant. All you read about is the ant. All you complain about is the ant. Are you with me? Sounding familiar? And now what happens to the ant? It turns into a lion. Simply by your focus on it, by your fixation on it. What you focus on grows. And so the fact that you have fixated on the ant, which was once just an ant, you have done two things at the same time. One is that you no longer see the blessings. You no longer see the gifts. You no longer see the ease. You no longer see the birds or the flowers because you have hyper focused on the ant, the problem in this current situation, because you're always going to look for something. There's always going to be something. You're never going to run out of the ants. You know what I'm saying? We're not in Jannah. And so what happens now is not only have you deprived yourself of the blessings, but you now are dealing with, you now have a lion on your hands because it's grown in its size in your own perception. Does that make sense? And now the ant is no longer its proper perspective size. It now looks like a lion that is like an all-encompassing. And I say this because it's one thing to know where it comes from. There is a root cause. There is a reason why you do this. And it is because you're trying to keep yourself safe. You're trying to keep your family safe. And you think that if you can just find all the possible ways that things can go wrong and then overthink. Overthinkers in the room? Do you want to know what's very interesting about overthinking? Overthinking is underfeeling. Whoa, mind blown. When I found that out, it was like, the emoticon, mind blown. Overthinking is underfeeling. What does it mean? It means I don't want to feel the negative emotions. And so I look for a way to escape through overthinking. I don't want to feel the uncomfortable sensation of fear. I don't want to feel the uncomfortable sensation of disappointment. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to overthink as a way to avoid feeling. And I'm also, and this is a big one, I am trying to get a sense of control. You know what this all comes down to, and this is very deep. It all comes down to an intolerance for something called uncertainty. Uncertainty intolerance is the root cause of so many of our dysfunctional behaviors. And this is very interesting because psychology has found this. But see, there is only one antidote to this. See, life is full of uncertainty, isn't it? Can you be certain what's going to happen tomorrow? Can you be certain what's going to happen 1 minute from now? Can you be certain what's going to happen a year from now? Can anyone get certainty of those things? No. But see, uncertainty is an inevitable part of dunya. You agree? If you have an intolerance to uncertainty, where did that come from? From a chaotic childhood. It comes from a childhood where there was unpredictability. It comes from a childhood where a parent was inconsistent or a parent was volatile. And so what happens is you learned in your nervous system that if I have uncertainty, I won't be safe. You've learned that uncertainty is unsafe. And so what you do as an adult is you try to remove any uncertainty as much as you can by controlling or trying to control everything. See, all of this is linked. All of this is linked. You try to control everything. You need to know exactly what's going to happen when it's going to happen. You need to be in control at all points or you don't feel safe. And then you replay things in your mind as a way to get control. By the way, this is an illusion of control. We are not in control. Allah is in control. And the only true antidote to this is tawakkul. It is la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said that this statement, la hawla, that there is no change in state, wa la quwwa, and there is no strength or power, illa billah, except by Allah, that this statement is a cure for 99 ailments. And the least of them is stress. And you can see why. Because it is the understanding that I'm not the one in charge. I'm not the one in control. I don't bring about the outcome, Allah does. I'm not the one steering this ship, Allah is. I'm not the one holding the mountain and making sure it doesn't crush me or my family, Allah is. Do you understand? And this giving of the sense of control to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only way to cure these ailments. The immense anxiety, the overthinking, the inability to handle uncertainty. The only antidote is to give it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, I mentioned that in our interpersonal relationships, there is certain behaviors that we default to when we are triggered. Now, I don't want men to feel like I'm picking on them, so I'm going to give an example that involves the wife, for example. So, I mentioned that when a wife approaches the husband and maybe gives some feedback, he might feel attacked, immediately hears, I am a failure, I am the worst husband to walk the earth. Rather than what she's actually saying, he's hearing something else. And that is from childhood. That's from what is called a defectiveness wound. It is the deep feeling inside that maybe I'm not good enough. That maybe I am not good enough. And so when you make a mistake, it touches that and you become very defensive, lash out, or shut down. Now I'm going to give another example where perhaps, let's say the husband is pulling away. Maybe he needs space, all right? A lot of times we have different sort of attachment styles. You may have heard about this. Attachment theory really explains a lot of human behavior, but we have different attachment styles. And oftentimes, not always, anxious attached individuals marry avoidant individuals, what are called dismissive avoidance. And oftentimes the dismissive avoidant is the husband and the anxious is the wife, not always, but often. And so what happens is someone who has an abandonment wound, maybe there was some level of abandonment in childhood, whether that was due to death, divorce, emotional abandonment, etc. That person develops what is called an anxious attachment style, and they have this deep, deep fear of abandonment, okay? So now, put that person in a marriage, yeah? And now maybe the husband is getting quiet, or seems to be pulling away. Maybe he needs some space. The wife doesn't hear, he just needs some space. This has nothing to do with me. This is just something, maybe he's processing something difficult that happened at work. The wife hears, I'm about to be abandoned. The wife now might react not to what's happening, but what it looks like. Remember, the brain is not asking, what is it? The brain is asking, what does it look like? And for someone with an abandonment wound, what it looks like is the abandonment that happened in childhood. And so that, in this case, the wife is going to react not to what's happening today, but what happened in childhood. And she will now react from the wound of abandonment. And now what happens? Well, what we would call chasing behaviors. Maybe over texting, over calling, like over explaining, the overs. They say that, see, all these overs, over explaining, over apologizing, overthinking, overworking, that all of these have to do with some sort of wound and the inability to tolerate uncertainty. And so in this case, the uncertainty is, what's going on in his brain? Is he going to leave me? Does he love me less? Is it something I did? What's wrong? And so what happens is an anxious person, an anxiously attached person would look at that behavior, which may have absolutely nothing to do with her, and often it doesn't. But she would look at it through the lens of her own wound, which was an abandonment one. And so now that would trigger her. And now she's acting from her survival brain, which is, I better chase him. I better over, right? I'm gonna now, what's wrong? What's wrong? Is everything okay? What did I do something? I'm sorry. Over apologize, over explain, chasing behaviors. And now what's that gonna do for an avoidant? What do you think chasing behaviors does for an avoidant, a dismissive avoidant? Does it make that person wanna get closer? No, it does the opposite. It pushes them further and further away. Why? Where does dismissive avoidance come from? Where does that attachment style come from? Dismissive avoidance, so this is like the opposite, right? But it also comes from childhood. It comes from a childhood where, for example, emotions were not safe. What does that mean? It means that emotions were something that were not talked about. Emotions were something that were ignored. Emotions were something that were dismissed. Emotions were even something that were punished. If you showed an emotion, you might have been mocked. You might have been shamed. You might have been called, too sensitive. You might have been, many times if boys are crying, why are you crying? Why are you acting like a girl? Why are you acting like a baby? You may have been shamed for the emotion. And so emotions were generally dismissed, ignored, shamed, or even punished. And so that individual learned emotions are not safe. So what's the survival tactic? Let me cut off emotions. Let me cut myself off from my own emotions. I don't even know what I'm feeling. I don't even know my own emotions. Why? Because they were not safe in childhood, and so I learned to survive by shutting them down, by cutting off from them, by suppressing. Now, if I don't know how to deal with my own emotions, guess what? I'm definitely not going to be able to handle yours. You see the problem? And then what happens is you got this woman and you got this man, usually. The woman, oftentimes, if she has an anxious attachment style, she's got a lot of emotions that she wants to share. She's coming with a lot. Because in childhood, she had almost this feeling that people are going to leave, or I feel unseen. I need to be heard. So she's coming with all this volatile, this volume of emotion. And she tends to be quite expressive, right? She's not shutting down. She's expressing, constantly expressing, right? So she's coming with all this emotion. And the fun part is that she's married an avoidant. She's married a dismissive avoidant, hasn't she? Hasn't she? Yes. And then what happens is she's coming with all this emotion, usually to her husband, who is often himself completely disconnected from emotion because it wasn't safe in childhood. And now he's like, whoa. That's literally his reaction, like, whoa, this is scary to his nervous system. This woman with all this emotion, and he's like, this is something that was never okay in childhood. This was not dealt with in childhood. This is not something we did. We didn't do emotion in our house. We didn't do this. We had a rug and we swept it underneath. That's what we did with emotions. That's what we did with problems, right? So what is wrong with this woman? She's just too much. She is too much. And what's happening is you're getting this dynamic because this woman felt like she was not seen or heard. And this guy's like, this is just over. This is just too much for my nervous system. I don't even know about my own emotions. How am I going to deal with all yours? And so what does he do? He's like, shuts down, avoids, maybe stonewalls, right? Avoidance. It's like, so then what he does is he pulls away because basically all her emotions are so much for his nervous system because he hasn't done emotions in his house. And all her emotions are so much for his nervous system that he's like, I have to shut down and escape. So then he now pulls away more. And what does that do to someone with an anxious attachment? Well, now makes her chase more. Do you see the problem? And these dynamics are what are actually at the root of our marital problems. And we don't even understand what's going on. But what's happening is we're working off of old programming. And we are acting out of that programming. This woman doesn't feel safe because she thinks that she's going to be abandoned. And this man doesn't feel safe because he thinks he's going to be controlled. This often also is related to an enmeshment wound, where maybe he had a very controlling parent, maybe a very controlling mother. Enmeshment is when the parent is enmeshed with the child. They're not two separate. They're enmeshed. Often this happens with a narcissistic parent, okay, where they live through the child. The child is there to validate them. The child is there to serve them, okay? And so this child then learns that, like, closeness is not safe. I need space, right? And both of these are childhood wounds. Neither of them are healthy, but they're triggering each other. And they are bringing out from each other these reactions, these survival mechanisms. What's the solution? What's the solution? Ultimately, the solution is regulating the nervous system. What does that mean? It means going back and teaching the nervous system that you are safe. That someone taking space doesn't mean you're going to be unsafe. That someone coming at you with feedback doesn't mean that you are a failure, doesn't mean that you're unsafe. So it's teaching the nervous system to be able to regulate in these circumstances. Now, how do we do that practically? I'm going to give you guys just some practical tips, because guess what? When you get married and when you have children, and sometimes interacting with our parents, all of the above are going to trigger you. All right? It's like that's what they're there for. You might say, why? Well, it's because if you have wounding, the closer someone gets to you, the more likely they are to touch one of those wounds. All right? Now, is that a bad thing, do you think? Well, it's bad in the moment, but do you know why it's actually a good thing? Because it points you in the direction of where you need to heal. Your triggers are actually pointers. Your triggers are pointers. They tell you, okay, this is historical. I'm acting hysterical. You can see that. You can start to become aware, all right? And one thing that's very important is this: accountability. Accountability. Now, I mentioned in the previous segment about, for example, narcissism. I said that, you know, this is the root of narcissism, or the root of some of these narcissistic traits. This is the root of the person who can't apologize. This is the root of these behaviors. Now, understanding where a behavior comes from does not mean the same thing as tolerating it. That's important, because boundaries have to be part of this discussion. Now, when we talk about relationships, right, whether that's a relationship with our spouse, with our parents, or with our children, so basically there are two very important principles in our relationship with our children, for example, in parenting. There are many different, there are different parenting, sort of philosophies, but the most healthy philosophy is one that is called gentle parenting or positive parenting, also known as authoritative parenting. Now, this type of parenting, a lot of people hear gentle parenting and they're like, you're going to let your kid do whatever they want? Is that what you're saying? Absolutely not. That's not what gentle parenting actually is. The two important principles, and I say this because this is your own homework. I say this because we have to break these intergenerational patterns and cycles. And the way that we're going to do that is by working on my own triggers, working on my own wounding, but also changing the way we parent. We have to change the way we parent because we otherwise pass on the wounds to the next generation. That's the thing about these wounds, is that they get passed on from generation to generation unless you break the cycle, all right? And so breaking that cycle means that I change the way I parent, I learn to regulate myself when I am triggered, and I learn to heal, okay? Now, how do I do that practically? So when it comes to healthy parenting, there are two important principles. Everybody with me? First is attunement, emotional attunement. This is the compassion, the empathy, the understanding, the attunement to the emotions of that child. It's seeing that child, okay? So seeing how they feel, attuning to how they feel, empathizing, compassion, while at the same time holding boundaries. The thing that people get confused about is that they think that gentle parenting means no boundaries. That is called permissive parenting. They're often confused, especially in popular culture and online. They're not the same thing. So gentle parenting is talking about I continue to have compassion, but I do it at the same time as holding boundaries. The example that I give to make it kind of clear is that you imagine you have a child and that child wants a cookie before dinner. So 3 types of parenting: authoritarian, gentle parenting, or authoritative parenting, and permissive parenting. So authoritarian parenting, what most of us grew up with, is all about control. The main purpose, the main goal is control. The parent wants to control the child, control the behavior. And control is the most important thing. And now the child, the parent chooses control at the expense of connection. This is very important. They choose control at the expense of connection. How does that look? Child misbehaves, punishment, severe punishment. Child misbehaves, timeout, spanking, hitting, rejection, cutting off. So all of these things, you'll see that they all have something in common, and that is disconnection, right? Even when you think of something, well, it's like, well, I'm not hitting them, I'm putting them in a timeout. But even if you think about that, it's still disconnection, all right, at some level. And so authoritarian parents are more interested in controlling the behavior rather than building the connection. Now, this is going to be very important in that child's future. I'll tell you why. Controlling your child can only work for so long. See, very, very strict parents, very, very harsh parenting, very, very controlling parents typically raise very good performers. Very talented, sometimes liars, and very sneaky kids. Why? Because it's all external control. And so what happens is, think about this. If as a parent, you've locked all the doors and all the windows because you're so strict and you're so harsh, what's going to happen is they're going to find a sneaky way to get out because you've locked the doors, you've locked the front door, you've locked the window, you've given them no out except the sneaky way. So the problem with is that the stricter the parenting, the stricter the parents, often the sneakier the child. The better performance. They're very good at performing. You've raised, walillah alhamd, awesome actors. Awesome. They will perform in front of you. But what happens when they're not in front of you anymore? They'll do whatever they want. They're performing because you have the actual control is external. It's external. It is not internal. This is not actual change. This is performance. This is performance. Actual influence does not come from external control or strictness. Actual influence comes from connection, from a solid, healthy, secure connection. And that brings me to the middle, which is gentle parenting. The idea in gentle parenting is, the goal of gentle parenting is not, I want to control my child's behavior. It's, I want a connection with my child. Do you understand? I want to build a solid, healthy, secure attachment to my child. And it is out of that secure attachment and bond that I will have influence. Does that make sense? Because influence doesn't come from external control. See that child that you were able to control when they were young? Eventually, they're going to be taller than you. And now they don't have to do what you say, huh? They can do whatever they want now. You can't control them anymore. Now they're bigger than you, they're taller than you, and they're not in front of you. That's the problem. And so this type of parenting backfires. When we look at the Prophet ﷺ, how did he raise his companions? The Prophet ﷺ, Allah describes him in the Quran, and he says that it was a mercy from Allah that you were lenient and gentle with them. And had you been harsh and hard-hearted, they would have been repelled from you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching us a psychology lesson in this ayah. Had you been harsh and hard-hearted, they would have been repelled from you. And this is the problem. Most of us are just modeling whatever parenting we received. And the truth is, it doesn't work. And so when we want to talk about actually influencing our child, influencing real tarbiyah, it does not come from external control and strictness. It does not come from being strict and harsh and hard-hearted. In fact, that brings about rebellion. That's why they rebel. That's why some kids grow up and go no contact. It's because there wasn't that healthy attachment. Maybe there was enmeshment, too much control. Or maybe there was too much of the external strictness. Now, when we look at the companions, why did they follow the Prophet ﷺ? Why did they follow him even into the trenches of battle? Why were they willing to even give up their lives alongside him? Was it because he was so harsh with them? Was it because he was so controlling with them? Or he was so strict on them? No, it was because they loved him. It was because they had a secure, healthy bond and attachment to him. And that is why he had so much influence over them. Does that make sense? And so as parents, this is our goal. Our goal is to have real influence over our child, and it does not come through external control. It comes through connection. It comes through secure attachment. And so gentle parenting is about how to build that secure attachment. And yes, it comes with love, empathy, compassion, and boundaries. So going back to the example of the cookie, right? So the authoritarian parent, if the child wants a cookie before dinner, Any loving parent will say what? No, because you won't eat your dinner. Now, what will any toddler do when you say no to a cookie? Anyone? End of the world tantrum, right? Kicking and screaming and throwing things and whatever, right? It's the end of the world for that toddler's brain. By the way, that toddler's brain is not fully developed. And so if you are an authoritarian parent, you will look at that behavior and say, bad behavior, gotta squash it, right? Time out, punishment, spanking, screaming, whatever. Punishing bad behavior. That's how you'll look at it. But the truth is, it's not bad behavior because that child is reacting in a completely developmentally normal way. Why? Because remember we talked about the prefrontal cortex where self-control happens? It is not fully developed until you're like 25 or 30 years old. You're expecting this 2-year-old to have full control over their emotions that 40-year-olds don't have? Do you understand? Have you ever seen an adult throwing an adult tantrum? And you're expecting the 2-year-old, who doesn't even have a developed prefrontal cortex, to be in full control of their disappointment. I'm sorry, but that's not developmentally possible. It's not developmentally possible. So now the question is, let's go to the opposite, permissive parenting. What does a permissive parent do once their child now is throwing the end of the world tantrum? Okay, here's the cookie. Now this is problematic because you're not holding the boundary, right? You're actually rewarding that behavior, which you're not wanting to do, right? You don't need to punish the behavior, but you definitely don't want to reward it. And so the problem with permissive parenting is you're not holding the boundary. Oh, you feel bad for the kids, so you give them the cookie. Oftentimes, and I'll just point this out, oftentimes we overcorrect. Many people who were raised by authoritarian parents go to the opposite extreme, which is permissive. And I think this is why maybe a lot of millennials end up permissive parents, because they are reacting to their upbringing as an authoritarian parent. The parents were just like, no, because I said so. Right? So then they go to the opposite and everything is a negotiation and everything is a discussion and there are no boundaries. This is an overcorrection. What is the right answer? I see that you are so disappointed about this cookie. I recognize, I validate, I empathize. I'm not punishing you, but you still can't have the cookie. Do you understand? It's validation plus boundaries. And that is how, in the whole framework of building a secure attachment. Does that make sense? Okay, and this is something, inshallah, my homework to you is to go and read more about this, because this is something we have to change in ourselves. Now, finally, I can give you all the information in the world. You can read every book in the world. In fact, you can be an expert who can give lectures and write encyclopedias. But healing doesn't happen here. It has to happen here. It has to happen in the body. What does that mean? It's not an intellectual exercise. It's something you have to practice. It's something you have to practice. So many people will say to me, yeah, I don't want to scream at my kids. It's all theoretical. Oh, I'm never going to scream at my kids. But then the moment you're triggered, what are you doing? You are screaming at your kids, and you're doing it in the same language that your parents screamed at you. Exactly the same. Do you ever notice when you're triggered, you sound just like your parent? What did I say about unconscious programming? This is the proof. Because you're no longer in your prefrontal. You no longer are utilizing all the information that you got in the books and in the lectures. You're just on default now. Now you're in the factory setting, right? Because you're triggered. So now what's the solution? I'll tell you something else very dangerous. Husband and wife are arguing. Does it happen? Anyone? No, never, right? Husband and wife are arguing. The moment that they get triggered, they are no longer in their prefrontal cortex. They are now no longer 35-year-old man, 30-year-old woman. They are 5-year-old boy and 5-year-old girl. We literally go back to our child self when we are triggered, if we haven't done the work, all right? And so now what's happening is you don't have two adults actually arguing. You don't have a husband and a wife who love each other, who are, know that they're married and on the same team having an argument. That's not what's happening. What is happening is husband looks at the wife and sees a tiger. Wife looks at the husband and sees a lion. Fight or flight. Fight or flight. And so you got a 5-year-old looking and seeing a lion, and another 5-year-old looking and seeing a tiger. And this is why we do things we regret. This is why we say things we regret. And sometimes we can be very cruel. This is the reason. It's because you're no longer looking at the relationship. Okay, we're on the same team. In that moment, you are not on the same team. It's all about self-preservation. I just have to preserve myself from this lion. It's not my wife. It's not my husband. It's a lion, and it's attacking me, and I have to preserve myself, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, it's self-preservation. If that takes insulting her, if that takes insulting him, if that takes being physical, whatever it takes, it's about self-preservation when you're in that state. That's a problem, isn't it? And we wonder why marriages don't work out. And so the question now is, what do I do in the moment when I am flooded, when I am triggered, when my prefrontal cortex is offline and now I am seeing a lion and now I am seeing a tiger and now I'm in fight or flight? What do I do in the moment? The answer is, I have to regulate first. I've got to calm my nervous system down. I have to tell my nervous system there is no lion in this house. Do you understand? And there are things that we can do in the moment to calm the nervous system, and we must. Because if we don't, we're going to be acting as though there's a lion. And that lion isn't a lion, it's your spouse. Or it's your child. Sometimes it's the child that we're seeing as the threat. Do you understand? When you're in fight or flight, whatever's in front of you is the threat. And that could be your child. And that's why we say horrible things to our kids sometimes. And then we regret it later. Or we do horrible things. And that's because we are in threat mode. And threat mode is only about self-preservation and survival. So how do we get the prefrontal cortex back online? That should be the big question, shouldn't it? Because that's where self-control happens. That's where better decisions happen. That's where rational thinking can happen. The answer is, first, pause. Pause before you react. Got it? Pause before you react. Second, name the feeling. Name it. There's a lot of research that shows that just the act of naming the emotion, the core emotion, the emotion, I am very angry right now. I am anxious. I am afraid. Just naming the emotion actually engages the prefrontal cortex. Isn't that interesting? This is why journaling works. This is the reason journaling works, because you're naming. You're naming things. You're getting your prefrontal cortex to process. So naming the emotion in the moment actually will re-engage the prefrontal cortex, get you out of that survival, okay? Second, taking very cold water and splashing it on your face. Now this is very interesting. This is something called the diving reflex. This is one of the fastest ways to down-regulate the nervous system. What does this sound like from the advice of the Prophet ﷺ? Make wudu. This is literally a physiological switch to turn off the fight or flight. It automatically calms the heart rate, calms this heightened fight or flight response. Cold water to the face. So what did we do? We pause. We name. You can say, I'm feeling very overwhelmed right now. I'm feeling angry. I feel. Just name it. Saying it out loud. Cold water to the face. Ice or something very cold to the back of the neck. If you hold something very cold to the back of the neck, this engages what is called the vagus nerve. Now, this is the part of the body that turns on that regulates the nervous system between fight or flight and rest and digest, right? So if you want to calm the nervous system, you want to engage the vagus nerve. Cold water to the back of the neck does that, okay? Breathing, changing your breathing. What's very interesting is that if you calm your breathing, it signals to the nervous system, there's no lion, everything is okay. Okay, so calming your breathing, there are various studied ways to do this. One of them is called box breathing, which is to inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then exhale. Especially in the exhale, make it longer. The other one that was shown to be the most effective is 2 inhales, 2 quick inhales. This is called the physiological sigh. 2 quick inhales, hold, and exhale longer. All right? This has been shown to calm the nervous system. See, these things, they can prevent you and, both of you from doing and saying things that you will later regret. Because you're getting out of the I see a lion, I see a tiger mode, and you can get and engage your prefrontal cortex back. And we all need our prefrontal cortex engaged for us to make good decisions. Okay, makes sense? Okay, subhanakallah wa bihamdak, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. I will pause here because I want to have an opportunity for questions, inshallah. Okay, note to everyone, the water should be on your own face. I can guarantee that if you splash water on someone else's face, that will escalate. Thank you. Yes. Say that again. Freeze. So the sister is asking about freeze. So when somebody freezes, they get easily overwhelmed with a task or with a situation, a stressful situation, and they freeze. So what's interesting is, and we didn't have time to go through all the trauma responses or the stress responses, but when you look at the stress responses, we usually hear about fight or flight. But there are 2 more that are typically recognized. So fight is, I see the lion, I fight the lion. Okay, clear enough. Flight, I see the lion, I avoid the lion, right? I go away from the lion, I run away from the lion. So a flight response could be overthinking, actually. A flight response could be, overthinking and anxiety. I'm not actually dealing with the issue, right? But I'm sort of avoiding it by going and escaping to my mind. But there are 2 more. One is called fawn, which is people-pleasing. People-pleasing, what people don't realize is people-pleasing is actually a trauma response. It was a way that you were safe and you were kept safe in childhood by appeasing and keeping everybody happy. Never disappoint anyone. Never say no. This is why people have difficulty saying no. It's because in childhood it wasn't safe to say no. It wasn't safe to let people down. It wasn't safe to disappoint others. And so you learn, I can't. Your nervous system actually believes that saying no is unsafe, that disappointing people is unsafe because it wasn't safe in childhood. Just like the one who can't admit that he made a mistake or she made a mistake because it wasn't safe in childhood to admit that you made a mistake. There was such a severe consequence. And so when you talk about fawn, it is a stress response, which is, I see the lion, I try to appease the lion. So I say to the lion, you know what, you are such a strong lion. I actually think that haircut really it looks nice on you. How about I get you McDonald's instead of me? Like, eat this instead of me. You're basically working to appease the threat. You're working to please the threat as a way to keep you safe. Okay? And then finally, there's freeze. Now, freeze is a very interesting stress response, which is what you're asking about. Freeze is what happens when, if, for example, in the animal kingdom, when the animal is being threatened and it can't fight the lion and it can't escape the lion, what does it do? It plays dead. It plays dead. That's the freeze response. It's, I can't change this situation because I'm helpless. Some of this is learned helplessness, which is its own phenomenon, which was learned in childhood, learned helplessness. I have no power. I am helpless. I cannot change this situation. And I also can't escape the situation. So I can't fight the lion and I can't escape the lion. I can't change the situation and I can't escape the situation. So what do? I play dead. I just shut down completely. I freeze. And this is a very extreme nervous system response. One psychologist explained it as a weighted blanket to the brain. Like it's like a complete shutdown because of feeling so unsafe and having no other way out. I can't change it and I can't escape it, so I just play dead and I shut down. And for some people, their stress response is freeze. And this also came from a childhood where that person felt totally powerless, yeah, but also felt that they didn't have the autonomy to get out of the situation either. And so they just learned, put your head down, just lay low until the storm passes, you know, just play dead. You know what's very interesting? Depression. Listen to this. Depression is a freeze response. Depression is a freeze response. It is a nervous system that is trying to protect you by just shutting down. Yes, so I'll repeat her question. So we're talking about childhood, but is it possible that the traumas we go through, if we can process them in a healthy way, that they can actually become a positive thing? And the answer is absolutely yes. And this is the beauty and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the capacity to not only survive, but to thrive through and after our storms. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, He has made the brain neuroplastic, what means that the brain has this quality called neuroplasticity, which means that you can rewire it. It's not stagnant. The wiring of the brain can be reprogrammed and changed. That's a mercy from Allah that allows us to heal. Similarly, many of you have heard of something called post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress disorder, the dysfunctions that come after trauma. But they've also found that there's something called post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth, that after trauma, if it is processed and dealt with, healed, that you actually can grow after that and through that. And so absolutely, and this is something I want to remind all of you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what He's doing. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us trials, those trials are not random. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curates and designs those trials specifically for us for a reason. Allah knows exactly what we are and what we need to change and what we need to grow. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never does anything randomly. So even our trials are designed for us. And so Allah does not give us trials to break us. Allah gives us trials to build us, to strengthen us. And so we have to look at our life through that lens. And yes, everything can be healed. And I honestly, this is something that I oftentimes get parents who come after, I talk about these topics, and they'll say, you know what, Yasmin, I messed up with my kids. I didn't do it right. Is there any hope? Is there anything I can do now? What can I do now? I messed up. And the answer is absolutely there is hope. You can always mend it. There is always hope of redemption. And honestly, the first step, and something that any child, no matter how old they are, will appreciate, and that is accountability. Going to that child, and I'll ask you this question. How many of you had parents who used to apologize to them? It's like, what? Do parents apologize? Is that a thing? Right? We never saw it. It was never modeled. Do you know how unhealthy that is? Because what message does that send to our children? Number one, it never models to them how to repair. Do you know how important, the most important part of a healthy relationship is repair? It's the ability to repair after conflict. It's not being perfect. No one's perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. There's no such thing as a perfect wife or husband or anything. But the most important thing is repair. If you do not model repair for your child, how will they learn in their life to repair? If you never take accountability, if you never apologize. The second thing that happens if you never apologize and never repair and never take accountability is that child grows up terrified of conflict, terrified of disagreement. Because what they've learned is disagreement and conflict is dangerous. It never gets repaired. It never gets fixed. So they actually become non-confrontational, terrified of healthy conflict, terrified of any disagreement, which isn't healthy. It's not healthy because you won't be able to resolve anything, right? If you have a problem and you can't come to your partner in a healthy way to address it, you're never going to resolve it. This is why problems just get put under the rug. They don't disappear, right? And so so as parents, one of the best things we can do is obviously regulate and heal our own wounds, but have the ability to acknowledge, to take accountability, and to apologize when necessary to our children. And no matter how old they are, that child will appreciate that. Okay, so the question of, what if you've, put aside, you've suppressed, how do you even know if you've been traumatized? How can you identify something as trauma versus not? So here's the thing. I'm going to go back to the analogy. If you have a gunshot wound that you have covered up, but it is unhealed, right? How are you going to know it's there? You're going to know it's there because anyone who even comes close to it, you will scream at the top of your lungs. Again, if it is hysterical, it is historical. You will know that there is old stuff, that there is old wounds, because your reaction to things will be hysterical. It will not be proportional to what is actually happening in the moment. Do you get it? You know parents who get super triggered by their children whining, for example. That's what kids do. But there are some parents who will it makes them crazy. There's something there. Probably when you were a child and you behaved that way, the consequence was severe. And so it triggers you. Whenever your child is triggering you, you're going to see a really big reaction. And you're going to know that they have touched something that is unhealed in you. And it is probably that when you behaved that way as a child, you got a really, really harsh reaction. And that is why they're triggering you, when they're behaving that way. So the way you know is just by your own triggers. This is why I say that triggers are pointers. They are pointers to where we need to heal. I use this analogy that we all have wounding, right? But many times we don't know where it is or what it is until we get married, man. Right? Because then as soon as you get married, it's like entering a giant X-ray machine. Right? Any close relationship is an X-ray machine. Now all of a sudden, you get this report. Ma'am, you've got a tumor here and here and here and here. What tells you that? Marriage does. Marriage does. Why? Because people, when they get close to each other, they bump up against all these different tumors and all these different gunshot wounds. And so what's happening is now you're getting all these triggers. Now, you get to decide what to do with that information. And this is where you see the difference between relationships that fail and relationships that grow. It's what you do after you're given the X-ray results. See, one reaction could be to slap the doctor, right? Like punch the doctor in the face. How dare you show me my wounds? How dare you tell me that I have wounds, that I have tumors? How dare you? You know what? You're the problem. Your X-ray machine is too sensitive. Right? You're the problem. Not me, you. Well, that's one way to react, which many of us do. Another way to react, which will determine the success of the relationship or the failure, is to say, thank you, doctor, for showing me where I need to work, where I need to heal. I take accountability for my own wounds. And this is the big take home. Your wounds are not your fault, but they are your responsibility to heal. Got it? They are not your fault, but they're your responsibility to heal. And one of the best analogies I heard about that is imagine that you had a condition from childhood, no fault of your own, that you vomit, projectile vomit every hour on the hour. That you have this condition. Something happened in childhood, and as a result, you projectile vomit every hour on the hour. Is it your fault? Anyone? No. Not a trick question. Is it your fault? No. But does that give you permission to vomit on the face of your boss at 12 o'clock, and then on the face of your wife at 3 o'clock, and then on the person sitting next to you on the train at 4 o'clock? Does that give you permission? No, it doesn't. So it was not your fault, but is your responsibility to manage. It does not give you a permission slip to now projectile vomit on everyone around you because of this condition. And unfortunately, some of us, we verbally vomit on the people around us. And that is not okay. We can understand where something came from. We can say it is not your fault, but that does not give you permission to verbally vomit on the people around you. It's your responsibility to address it. Okay, great, two great questions. So his first question was, if I were to ask this question, what did you have to do to earn love, acceptance, safety? And someone responds, I didn't have to do anything to earn it. It was unconditional. Would I be surprised? And the answer is, I would be surprised because it is very rare. And I don't say that it doesn't exist, but unfortunately it is rare, and I hope to God that it becomes less rare and it becomes something that we are able to change. But unfortunately, in the current situation that we live in, especially in the Muslim community, we have an unbelievable amount of intergenerational trauma. Unbelievable amount. And there are various reasons for that. Part of it is political, part of it is war. We have generations that were refugees, et cetera, but the reality is that we have an unbelievable amount of trauma. So most people are not raised in a secure attachment. Most people were not raised in a secure attachment. And so yes, I would be surprised. I would be pleasantly surprised. Okay. The second question is there a way to do the healing process where, it's not maybe so severe that I have to go to a psychiatrist? By the way, there is no shame in getting therapy. This is part of tying our camel, as the Prophet ﷺ advised the companion. He wasn't tying his camel. He asked him why. He said, because I have trust in Allah. He said, "Aqilha wa tawakkal." He said, tie it and also put your trust in Allah. So going to the doctor when we break our leg, that's tying our camel. Going to a counselor when we have a problem in our marriage, That's tying our camel. Going and getting therapy when we have unresolved trauma, that's tying our camel. However, his question is, do we all have to go for therapy? Or is there something that we can do, to self-heal? And yes, of course, there are things that we can do to self-heal. Honestly, it depends on the situation. But if you do need to go to therapy, there's no shame in that, okay? But what is the process of healing in general? The process of healing in general, I want you to think about it as digestion of unprocessed emotion, okay? So the way I explain it is, imagine that you go and you eat this giant rotisserie chicken, because everything's bigger in Texas, and you eat this chicken, but you have no ability to digest the chicken. You do not have the tools. Maybe you don't have the gut bacteria, the proper gut, the gut bacteria to actually break it down. So as a result, the chicken, giant rotisserie chicken that you just ate, what's it going to do inside of your gut? It's going to sit there. Now, one day of undigested chicken, it's going to make you pretty uncomfortable, pretty, bloated. You're going to have some, issues in the bathroom, whatever. But what happens after a week of that undigested chicken? What do you think will happen after a month? What do you think will happen after a decade or 2 or 3 of this undigested chicken? Well, obviously, it'll kill you. It'll poison you, right? And this is what happens with unresolved emotion, trauma, and pain, is that the body needs to digest it in order to release it. That's the best way I can explain it. And if we never had the tools, the gut bacteria, to digest our pain, our emotions, our traumas, then what happens is it stays and it becomes poison. It becomes poison inside of our bodies. It makes us sick. And I don't just mean sick mentally, but even sick physically. I gave you the research about the connection between suppression of healthy emotion and autoimmune disease. And so it shows up as illness, not only mental illness, but also physical illness. And so what is the solution is I have to digest. I have to digest. How do I digest? Is that I have to be able, and again, sometimes in order to get into these emotions that haven't been digested, whether that is shame or that is grief, some people have not properly grieved for lost loved ones. It could have been decades ago, and they still haven't grieved properly, which means the rotisserie chicken is still sitting there. They haven't actually processed that grief and that pain. And so how do I get back into those emotions and digest it? And the answer is I have to do it in safety. So what it is I am reprogramming my nervous system to learn that it is safe to feel sadness. It is safe to feel anger. It is safe to feel grief. It is safe because at some point in my history, it wasn't safe. And so it's going back into the emotion and going back even into the experience, but this time in safety. And so sometimes, yes, that requires therapy. It requires a therapeutic environment for that. And sometimes it can be even in interpersonal relationships. It can be, in safety. Sometimes it can actually be showing up as your authentic self in an intimate relationship. And that can be part of your healing and part of your processing. So ultimately, it's about learning to feel your own pain in a way that is safe. And that's how we begin to digest. But we have to be able to sit with uncomfortable emotions, and that's the big take home. We have to be able to sit with uncomfortable emotions without trying to escape, without trying to fix, without trying to shut down, without lashing out, without all the different ways that we use to self-medicate and avoid. We have to be able to sit with it. That's how we process.
So should we take a small bite of the chicken
Yeah, take piece by piece of the chicken and digest it bit by bit. Yes. So what the brother said is that oftentimes he's noticed that when you have two people who have experienced trauma, sometimes the man is looking for the woman to have that soft touch to kind of help him to process the trauma or deal with it, and the woman is looking for the man to protect her from the trauma or as a protector. And so the question he's asking is it best to do our individual work or to get help together as a couple, right? And I think it's all of the above. I don't think it's a one size fits all, but I think that the key is accountability, really. The key is I cannot blame or put the responsibility on another person for my own healing. I can't outsource it. I can't make it my husband's responsibility, and I can't make it my wife's responsibility. It's my responsibility. And so I have to do the work. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that the relationship doesn't serve a container for healing. It can, very much. A healthy relationship is actually a place where people can heal, but it has to be based in personal accountability. This is not your responsibility. I can't lash out on you because of what happened to me. And I also can't make it your responsibility to regulate me. It is not your responsibility to regulate me. It's my responsibility to regulate me. Recognizing it? Okay, so let me repeat your question. Tell me if it's correct. Her question is, imagine that each of them have their own traumas and each of them have their own insecure attachment styles. Maybe it's anxious, maybe it's avoidant or dismissive avoidant. By the way, there's a third insecure attachment style, which is a combination of these two. Some of you might have been like, I do both. Yeah, congratulations. There is a third one. And this one is sometimes the most complicated, and it's usually due to big T trauma. And this is called disorganized or fearful avoidant. You can do your own research, but basically your question is, what happens when you recognize that in the other person or in yourself, and you're trying to make the other person recognize it in themselves and they don't want to? Good question. And I usually get this question at some level, which is, how do I change another person? At some level of that. And the answer is you can't. The answer is you can't. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow, but we cannot change another person. We cannot save another person. They have to want that. They have to own that. And so, one of the biggest fallacies is this idea that I can love someone hard enough that it'll save them from their own trauma. And that's impossible. You can't, there's this idea that like if I just drown myself enough, I can save a drowning person. And that doesn't work. And so if I can just shrink myself enough, if I can just change myself enough, if I can just abandon myself enough, I can save that other person. And it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. The answer is, it has to be your own accountability, your own journey. Yes, you can support someone. I'm not saying you can't, right? There's something called co-regulation, which is very, very important. Yes, you can support someone in that journey, but you can't do it for them. You cannot do it for them. And I know, especially us women, we are the saviors, right? We want to save everybody. And the idea is, if only I could. It's this Beauty and the Beast, right? What happened in Beauty and the Beast? Well, there's this notion, right, which many of us have absorbed, which is you got this beast. Literally, he's called a beast. He is a beast. He is extremely abusive. Am I right? Like he literally kidnapped her dad and put him in the basement. Everybody with me? Okay. He is literally an abusive beast. But then what happens? Well, here's the message. If you're kind enough, forgiving enough, and beautiful enough, because she's beauty, you can turn a beast into a prince. What a toxic message. It's like, absolutely not. But this is literally what we think. And it works the other way too. I'm not saying it's a gender thing, right? We cannot, it's the same thing with a man trying to save a woman from herself. We cannot save another person from themselves. What we can do is be supportive, and what we can do is change ourselves. This is about self-accountability. This is not about how we're gonna change others. This is how I'm gonna change me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Indeed, Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what's inside themselves. And so it begins with me. It begins with me. Make sense? Yes. Okay, great. So I would definitely look into the work of Gabor Mate. He has a lot of research, he has a lot of literature about parenting and about secure attachment, okay? In terms of attachment theory, I would look into the work of Sue Johnson, Dr. Sue Johnson. She is basically the founder of a type of therapy called emotion-focused therapy, which is based in attachment theory, and it is the most effective type of therapy, by the way. It is more effective than any other type of therapy. So Sue Johnson's work. And then we also have the work of John Gottman. John Gottman is the one who did, he's basically has done years and years, decades of research on marriage, and he has studied marriages. He has been able to predict who will get divorced and who will not get divorced just by observing couples at the beginning of their marriage and how they interact by over a 90% accuracy. And so the work of John Gottman as well. And there's others. Secure Love is another book that I would recommend, the book Secure Love. The Body Keeps the Score, and When the Body Says No, by also Gabor Mate, about the effect of trauma on the body.